Okay, for our next video, we are going to be practicing some techniques you can use in your acrylic paintings. These are really good to know. Anytime you're creating something, you can think of the texture that might be appropriate and then reverse back to this page, and hopefully that will help you as you are going through your process. So I'm going to show you 8 techniques. These will be labeled out on the board for you as well. Scumbling, blending, dry brush, sgraffito or combing, wet into wet, glazing or overlay, and palette, impasto, so this is using the palette knife, and finally the mask, okay? Because of timing, I'm going to actually start with the glazing and the overlay because we need this to allow to dry as we are working on the other ones. So with this, you're just gonna pick a few colors you'd like to work with. We are gonna be using our round tip brushes. You can also use your smaller flat tip brush if you would like to. In order to label these out, the first thing you want to do is take your ruler and you are going to mark every 2 inches along the side of both pages. You can see I have the book spread open to 2 pages, so you have a little more room to work. I simply measured every 2 inches going down and then did the same thing across, then lined it up with my ruler to create my 4 rows. And then on each page I have the 4 techniques, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and label this as number 2. Always make sure you have your label up in the top corner. So starting with glazing. With glazing or overlay, you are simply working in layers. So it works best if you start with a darker color and then you glaze over top of this. So I'm gonna take my round tip brush and just place some marks in this section, okay? You can place exactly the marks I'm placing. You can try making up your own marks. Just try to make sure that you don't have a whole lot of water on your brush at this point because you want your color to be rather opaque. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave that there as that dries and then we'll come back to it. So the next one we're gonna start with is scumble. Scumble or scumbling is just really quickly layering colors on top of each other. It's really great for creating trees or bushes or any sort of vegetation, even rocks. I like to pick 2 colors that are next to each other on the color wheel for scumbling, and you'll see why. They are gonna end up mixing a lot. So what I'm gonna do first here is just take my green, and I'm applying a stamping motion. Rather than swiping, I am just tapping my brush on the surface. Again, my brush is very dry. You don't want a whole lot of water on your brush for this. And as you can see, we're starting to build up some sort of a texture here. Kind of vegetation looking anyways, just why I've chosen green. But this works really well like for stone paths or something too. You can start with gray and then layer white or black on top. Okay, so I'm gonna wash out my brush really well. I'm gonna go ahead and pick up yellow now. And same technique over top of my green. Okay, and you wanna make sure you're using a stamping motion, not a swiping motion, because you want your colors to sort of mix but still also maintain a texture. Okay, so I really like to use that again, like I said, for vegetation. Sometimes what I'll even do, and I'm gonna go ahead and do this right now so you can see, is I will even work in a 3rd color. So like, let's say I wanted some parts of the trees to appear in shadow. Using an analogous color of blue to green, I can slowly stamp in even a darker texture along with the yellow and green, okay? So that's scumbling. Blending, we've practiced a little bit already, but always good to keep practicing. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the white and just place that on my paper, sort of a whitish gray at this point. And I wanna bring it about halfway across because as you might remember, you have to overlap in order to get a nice blend. So then I'm gonna take a color that's near that. So for this situation, it would be a gray. If you were choosing colors, you would want to pick a color that is next to that color on the color wheel. So for example, red and orange would blend nicely. Okay, so I have those 2 there. I'm gonna wash off my brush, and then I'm just going to pull that gray over into my white or lightish gray here, and just try to feather a nice transition from that light gray to dark gray. Okay, And there is a time limit with blending when you are working with acrylic paint. So as you can see, I put quite a bit of paint on there. If you put more paint, you'll increase your amount of time that you can to blend. Otherwise, overlapping also helps, okay? So blending, dry brush is our next one. Simply make sure your brush is super, super, super dry. With this one, I like to try 2 different brushes just so you can see that you're gonna get a very different line depending on what brush you use. So my brush is very dry and I'm just going to simply drag it across, adding water. Another fun way to get some texture, as you can see, you have some of those areas where the paint would not coat. So we get some interesting texture in the gap spaces there. Just trying the smaller brush too to see if there's anything I like on there. Okay, so there's dry brushing. Sgraffito, or combing as it's often called, is simply where you scratch into your paint, okay? So again, with this one, I feel like picking a darker color is a little bit better. You're gonna see it a little more. So make sure you apply your paint generously, okay? So I'm gonna do some blue on here, just painting a ground first. And this one actually works a little better on canvas, but it'll work okay for today. After you have applied your ground, very quickly, you take the end of your brush and you're gonna scratch into that wet paint, okay? So timing is a little bit important here as well. If it was too dry, I wouldn't be able to do this, okay? So really nice way to get some more texture. Okay, and the last one over here on this next side, we're gonna do wet into wet. Wet into wet works just like watercolor does. So first you're going to make sure your brush is clean. Okay, and if you ever have that happen, just dry your brush off. And you can go ahead and pick it right back up. My paper towel is just a little dirty there. Okay, then I'm going to put down a watery ground. So soaking the surface, okay? Then, again, using a lot of water, I'm just going to place my acrylic into that wet paper. And I try to make sure my acrylic has a decent amount of water in it as well. And you can see it starts to expand. If it's not expanding, you might need to take some water and mix it into your acrylic paint because they do tend to be a little bit of a thicker viscosity. So if you're not getting that watery effect like you like, mix in some water to your acrylic and then drop it into the wet paper, okay? Okay, so palette impasto is where we're gonna go next. So this is using a palette knife. You might have seen paintings that looked really thick and chunky. Vincent van Gogh used palette knives a lot to really lay that paint on thick. So this is a nice way to build up a really chunky, fun texture if you want that kind of effect, okay? So you just kind of scrape it through your paint and you are gonna pick up a decent amount and you just drag it across your paper, okay? You can leave it as thick as you'd like. There's a lot of techniques that you can use just with the palette knife itself. I like to layer colors because you see the texture better. So I'm gonna wipe off my palette knife on a paper towel and I'm gonna scoop up some white now and just chunk it on there. You can try some different things. You can swipe it across to get sort of a smeared look. You can draw into the paper with the palette knife. Okay, you can kind of move it in like a zigzag and it leaves like a little zigzag texture. Okay, so pretty fun thing to try. Also works really well on canvas panels that are a little thicker than paper. Mask, you're just gonna use plain old masking tape. This is a good one if there's a certain area that you want to protect for some reason. Maybe you want to create a certain scene and you want like a watery background, but you don't want to worry about the water getting on top of, let's say you have some white buildings or something like that, okay? So you're simply masking off or covering a part of your paper. Just trying to go for like little skyscrapers or something, just kind of make it more entertaining. Make sure that you really get your masking tape stuck down good. I always kind of take my hand and burnish it before I start painting, okay? And then you just paint right over top the masking tape. I'm going to water down my blue a little bit on this one, just to spread it better, okay? And this one you will have to wait until it dries. And then you can peel up the masking tape. Okay. So again, or I've seen other people use this like if they want to make borders or edges and they want those edges really, really clear and sharp. Kind of fun for that. I'm just gonna add a little bit of white into my wet blue paint there because it's fun. Okay. All right, so then our last one I'm going to show you today is we're gonna go back to your glazing or overlay, which should be dry now. With this one, I'm just gonna pick a lighter color. I'm gonna go ahead and do yellow. And you want to water it down slightly. Glazing, you're just going to get a sort of a tint over your paper or over your color. And I can see my blue's a little wet still, but not too bad. And you're just gonna go right over top. And because my second coat or color I've added is watered down, you can see my underpainting pretty well, okay? This works really well if like you're trying to make it look like it's a shadowy area and you want everything to have like a certain tint. Maybe you want it to have a bluish tint. Maybe you want something to look really sunny, so you want everything to have a yellow tint. You can always paint out your basic shapes and then water down a color and glaze over top to get a certain mood or effect, okay? All right, thank you guys for listening.